this ellipse speech bubble, it's everywhere, and it's just, it doesn't look nice, especially when you fit text into it. It just doesn't look nice. There's such an easy fix for this. So let's just make smart object, edit, transform, warp. And we're going to go to custom and go fisheye. And that looks a lot better. And we can customize this to whatever amount we want. Say 20, even 22 is starting to look better. I find 33, I like using multiples of 11. It's easier to type in and it's close enough to base 10. 55 looks nice. And if you have like a lot of text or whatever, you could go all the way to 99, but that's probably too much. 77 feels a bit much. So I would say 55, 54, 33. Let's try 33. And if we go to history, we can toggle from that to that. And it's just a nicer form, and it creates a much more pleasant area around here and here. It's a nicer space. And we can always go in and trim this a little bit too to fit the text area a little better. And we don't have these really ugly like eyesore shapes on one side or the other. Like this complete waste of area here. It's now fitting much more nicely. The white space, the negative space is stronger. Why don't people do this? And I've even seen it in like printed comics, like people who should know better. It drives me crazy. Stop doing it. Really, stop doing it. It's terrible. So I'm more or less showing you the procedure for doing it in Photoshop. I'm going to show you this procedure for doing it in Krita, how I set up speech bubbles. And if you want the production files, they'll be available on my Patreon for the $10 tier. That's where I drop all my production files. Let me walk you through this whole thing from scratch. So we make a folder, call it bubble, and let's delete the other one. Just start from scratch. Group and contents, make a new layer. We make sure that our image is decent size. So it's about, oh, this is huge. This is probably even way too big for what we're doing. Image size, let's come down to 720. And we'll make our ellipse here and fill it with white. At this point, we call this bubble and just call this speech. And we'll right click on here and make a smart object. And now we can scale this non-destructively. So we can make this any size we like. We can do this and this with it. You could even make a sphere if you want. I just think it's nicer to have the smart object be a little closer to what the final thing is going to be. On the folder layer, right click and go blending options, stroke, with a maybe about 4, 5, 6 until it starts to feel nice. Usually for this size, let's say about 8. And now we can scale that down a bit. I use an old version of Photoshop, so sometimes it acts like a little fritzy with it. So if you're seeing that kind of flash, switch off the stroke for a moment. Now I'm going to create the speech bubble line itself, and I'm going to use the path tool. Now you can keep it simple and just do something like this, like I did originally. But if you really want to get nice effects, a tool I actually kind of hate is the path tool with Bezier handles. So you might be a bit cold on that as well. But if you are, don't worry, I'll walk you through it. So we hit the pen tool. I'm going to switch off the layer below. Let's make a new layer, and we'll just draw a point. And I think for a basic one, let's just use 3 points and close that. Now at this point, if you've never used this before, it can be a bit of a puzzler. Like, what do I do with this? Easy. You go to your direct selection tool, select that. Now bear in mind, it's very easy to accidentally select path. We want direct selection tool. And now if we click on this, we have access to the points. And you can probably see where this is going now. So this is going to be used to create another smart object. So let's just zoom out so we can kind of size it right. And holding down the Alt and Control. And now we can break apart these points here. And if we want, let's say, to add another point in here, go back to the Path tool, and we can add an anchor point tool here and here. And now we can go back to the Selection tool. And this enables us to soften it, to put a little break on it, make it look maybe a little less digital, give it like a nice little S curve. But I think for our basic one, let's just go with a C shape. And now we go to a window called Paths. And in the work path, we select this little marching ant here. And that turns our path into marching ants. Back to our Layers tab and fill it. That's it. That's how we create these forms. And if you want to get back to the paths, it's still there. You can still click on that. So it's still active. Like, you can still go back and nudge it and noodle it if you want to customize it later on. Anyway, let's go back to here. This is going to be our fill tool now. So we can get rid of all of our paths, please. And we call this one the align. Just call it the speech line. Right click, convert to smart object. And now we have 2 smart objects and a stroke. This is the part I love about this. You can move this around I'm going to scale it down a bit. And because the scaling is happening to a smart object, you're not seeing pixelation happening as you size this thing up and down. It's as sharp as it's going to be here. I don't have a sponsor, so if you want to support my work and help it to continue, you can subscribe to my Patreon. I'm making new animation projects week by week and providing animation assets that can be downloaded and used. I also have a very large collection of tutorials in the LinkedIn Learning Library covering animation and design, and I'm putting all the links to these in the notes below. So now we go to the bubble, edit, transform, warp. Fisheye 33 is nice. Click on that, place. So now we have a very elegant speech bubble. We have our line here. You might not like this roundy effect here, so if that's the case, we double click on the stroke, and instead of outside, we can actually go center, which is good. And if you really want a sharp, it'll go inside, and that gives a very dangerous looking point there. But I find center kind of gives a nice balance of the two. It just depends. Effectively, that's it. You can make different speech lines depending on how far you want to go with the path tool. Let me show you one I did earlier, like in all the cooking shows. So this file will be available on my Patreon. I'll have the link to that below. The other thing I guess to show would be the right text, because that can be a bit of a puzzle too. What font do you want to use? Smack Attack BB is really nice. I like that a lot. WBX Comic is, all these can be downloaded. Just do a Google search or a DuckDuckGo search. I don't like Google, but anyway, you can probably find them on there. Ames is all right, doesn't look bad. And Blambot's kind of nice too. So let's say you want to do text. I'm just going to throw some down, scale it down. And one other little subtlety will be in Photoshop is kerning, which is very nice. A lot of people seem to forget this. Honestly, there's no excuse to not do a little kerning. So holding down the Alt or Option key and moving the playhead or the cursor, I can then space these in a much more accurate and pleasant way than the automatic one. So you see here that A is too close to the H. We should have a comparable gap between the H and the A and the A and the N. And you can also close up gaps too. If you think the spacing is too much, then you can really improve it. Anyway, that's kerning. So this is how you would create a speech bubble in Photoshop, move it around. We can scale it non-destructively. Notice how on my older version here of Photoshop, it gets really weird. Again, that will not happen if you have stroke off. Stroke is a bit of a hog in any version of Photoshop, but in the older ones, it's certainly a hog. So we switch it off to manipulate, and then when we have our size back, we can always go back in, change the stroke to whatever new size we want so that it looks good. So no more excuses, no more ellipses. Thank you. Let's go to Krita and do the same thing there. Here I have Krita. There are differences in Krita. Let me demonstrate the pros and cons. Some parts of Krita are way better. I tried to bring in the PSD into Krita from Photoshop and it was a disaster. It just doesn't work. You have to do like a Krita native equivalent. So I'll walk you through what I have here. And one thing that I realized very early on, let me switch off the blend mode here too. I realized that we do have access in Krita to vectors. So let me see if I can get the right layer active here. And I'm using this tool here. It's the Edit Shapes tool because I've made this bubble here with the Shapes tool. So this can be moved around and scaled, and we can do all kinds of stuff with it. So a much more intricate setup compared to what we did in Photoshop. Definitely a little glitchier. There's no way to go around that. But once you have it set up, you can do so much more. So let me go back to the point tool here, and I can do things like dynamically change the shapes of the little speech bubble areas that I've already set up. So if you want to customize these on the fly, you can copy this around and do different things with it. So if you want to reach a character who's further to the left or to the right, you can do that without any problem at all. And I think I have a straight one here too, and these are set to be non-Bezier curvy, so we can do all of that. And we can grab the folder, I think it's this tool here, drag it. Now see what's happening here. If I go too fast, you'll see it tearing a little bit, but that's okay. So we put effects back on, and same thing here, right click, layer style, stroke. Looks familiar, right? And then we can bring the stroke up a bit. It's a little more sluggish than Photoshop, definitely, but certainly gives a lot more leeway. And again, we're losing the white space in there. So let's go layer style, stroke, and we can make it outside if we want to do that. Click OK. We have all the same abilities. Now, one thing that Krita really needs help with is text. The latest version 5.2, they have definitely improved the text handling. Apparently, I haven't used the previous one much, but it does feel okay. It's certainly not as usable as Photoshop. Apparently 5.3 will implement the next version, hopefully out soon, will implement the user end features. Right now, to do text in Krita is a lot more labor intensive compared to Photoshop. It opens in a separate window. I'll show you all that in a moment. But let me show you another sound effect that I've created here. Again, using a mask. Actually, let's switch that off. So we have various layers here with, again, all created with the same Bezier tool. If I open up just one of these, this one, the same thing. So we have all these lines here can be manipulated. So if you want a bigger explosion effect, again, this file will be available in my Patreon for €10 or dollar tier subscribers. But it's easy enough to construct this yourself. All I'm going to do now, walk through the construction process in Krita and see how painful it is or isn't. And I'll show you some of the glitches as well, so you don't worry about them if you step on those. Let's make something smallish. It'll make it easier. 1280 by 720. Switch the background off. And again, we're going to use a group layer, and then we'll put our folders inside that. So we'll call this one text. And this will be our bubble layer. And again, same thing, we're working with Beziers. You don't have to, you can work with like a basic shape if you like. It just means if you do a lot of scaling, it'll start getting pixelated. So because we're working with vector layers, I made a mistake first time around this, we have to make a vector layer, otherwise we have problems. So we have our vector layer and we select the ellipse tool and let's make an ellipse. And my default settings, that ones I happen to have active, are this awful color scheme. So let's select the select shapes tool, click on that. Beautiful. So now we can go in here and begin to muck around with it. So we have the line tool tab. Let's click on the color and make it black. And I think if we select the center of it, see if I can find that too. I think that's this fill tool here. That's color white. So it's this tab here. This gray area box. It's not exactly intuitive, but you'll see the process. It's a two-step process, and then you have it. Now the next thing I want to do obviously is I don't want to worry about this black line because we're going to make that happen with a blend. So let's go back to the line, make that thickness down to 0. See if that'll take. Brilliant. So, and then we'll call this one bubble. And again, right click on the text folder, layer style, stroke, whatever works here. And now we can switch that on or off. And we also are seeing like a sort of a black line there. So let's go back into that layer and let's see if we can get rid of this line style or make it white. There we go. So I don't want to be distracted by that. I just want to have that pure white shape. Okay, I'm going to move that now over here. Make another vector layer. Easy to accidentally make a paint layer. We want another vector layer, and you'll see it's got these little dots. I don't love the icon design here. It's kind of the same, very similar shape to that. It's not good UI design. So let's do the Bezier tool, see if this works. And if I click and drag, it creates these handles automatically. So let's make our shape like this. Make another one here and close it. Let's see if this has gone berserk. I think we need to select this point selection tool here and let's fix it. So we have this weird shape here. So let's hold down I think it's the control key, and that will help break it. And we can also break it inside the tool options panel. So we can make the things symmetrical, or we can break them using this icon here. I think it's the first one. There we go. And the other thing I want to do is go into the selection tool again and do the same thing here. Let's make this 0 and we'll fill it in white. So now we'll call this one line. And again, if we go back to this tool here, the edit shapes tool, then we can go back in and play with the Beziers. And now I can drag it with the move tool. And if we put effects back on, you can see we have basically the same process that we had. And if I click on here and drag, you'll see the lag. Watch this. It's definitely laggy. So one thing to do is switch off effects if you're moving it around. Reduces the lag a lot. We can then resize this as we like. Make it really small. Rotate it. Do all that. I don't like rotating if I can help it. And then we click on again, drag again, and there is no loss of pixelation. The vectors come right back. And we can then play with this again. Right click, layer style, stroke. We can change the color of the stroke if you want like a different speech bubble color. I don't think we need that. Let's go back to black. Maybe make it a bit smaller. So remember the big screed I did about don't using these boring ellipses. Okay, so let me show you, I think, a simpler way of creating the bubble effect in Krita. I'm going to select the rectangle tool, draw a rectangle, and this time we select it with the arrow tool here, and actually with with this point tool here, and we go convert to path. And now we have turned these points into things that we can edit. I also want to go back to the selection tool here and actually, yes, go to this line and take this down to 0 again. It's very annoying. I don't know offhand how to make that default, but anyway. Okay, so now we can go back to the select points tool and we can pick these points, click on each one and just tell them to be basically equal. So we can use these Beziers to modify them now. This gives us a very powerful way to create our speech bubble. This has the advantage now of giving us something that looks like it was created by a human and not by an algorithm. This really, and we can also size it through the usual transform tool. Let me go back to the point here. We can also add points through this tool here. So if we go to this line and go insert a point, then we can modify it some more. So if you want like a kidney bean speech bubble, we can do that. And you can change, you can add or remove points. You can play with them. I'm not going to go into any great detail here, but we can do all kinds of cool stuff here that will allow you to make a shape that looks like not sterile, which is what the other one does. So let me select that line there, add a point. Maybe you want to have like a bit of a floor on here. We can make this point here, see how it's broken? We can make it equal, and that creates something that will have a smoother curve on it. We can also break it apart again later on if we want. Same thing here. And then we click off. There's a kind of an ugly line there. Let me fix that. The result of this Bezier here. So once we're done with that, we have our form here. This is certainly a little clunkier. I'm not going to waste any more time fiddling with it. I've fiddled enough, but you get the idea. You can do a lot of stuff with this. You can change it by grabbing on the curves. And you can see on the one that I beautified a lot more earlier that it's got a lot more subtlety to it. That file will be available for you to download on the Patreon and then use as you need. So one thing I'm going to flag for you is the trickiness I found when moving some of these from this file into the other. Let me save this. I'm going to right click on this folder and go copy a new image. And let's say this is our comic page and you want to import it. You click on here and go Control V, and now we have it in. So actually it's kind of worked very smoothly this time, funnily enough, when you want it to not work. So again, let me switch off the effects. So I had some glitches happen with it, and it's just a question of being very patient and very slow with it. If you have these issues, again, be patient and take your time. Sometimes I would have the object arriving over here, and I would only see it when I click on the transform tool, and you can see the object has come in off screen. Let me make a new image that's bigger. Go Control D. And it's behaving itself now. So I'll never understand why things work 1 second and don't when you don't want them to work. Anyway, here we go. So here is a glitch. Got it? You see, as I begin to move the speech bubble down, we're getting this strangeness. And I think it's got something to do with the way Krita handles the frame. There's an easy workaround for this, and that is make a new group layer and then just copy the others into that. And I think this will work. Delete the old one. And then we can just reapply the stroke. And now we're fine. Then you could simply, for multiple characters, if you want to duplicate this, you right click, duplicate layer or mask. So you can have various versions. I'll switch off the effects. I would only put that on at the final render stage. And then if you want to customize the line, again, it's the same process. So if you have different characters talking to one another, like that. And then when you're happy with the placement, then you can put effects back on. So I do the same process more or less in Photoshop because it allows me to have maximum speed. To switch off the blend modes, only put the blend modes back on when you're happy and you're going to save that as a flattened PNG file. That's basically it. Once again, another glitch. I'm opening up the file. This is the kind of stuff that, again, I wish wouldn't happen, but it's good that you see that it does happen because it'll give you an idea about the kind of stuff that you kind of hit. You open this file and go, where's the stuff? Basically, it's just a question of reactivating all the layers. It's weird. I think I may just have so many blend modes on that it's throwing something off. This is the way the program behaves right now, so hopefully it'll be a bug fix for the next update. So I did want to also show you how to do text in Krita to compare it to the other one. Okay, so let's take a look at how text behaves in Krita. It's slightly different from Photoshop, and if you go back and forward, it can kind of mess with your head a bit. So let's switch off the text layer I've already done. Click on the text tool here. Let's see here if it'll let me. Okay, now when I began coming from Photoshop back into this, even though I used Krita yesterday night for some time, my brain lapsed and I went back into Photoshop mode, and I'm like, why isn't the text tool working? You have to click on the T and then you draw a box, and that opens up the edit text box. So let's type in some text. We'll pick a font, Smack Attack BB, and now here we can type in some text, center it, click save. Okay, and now we can modify this by, the usual. But the difference in Photoshop being that we can go in and actually edit the thing live. If there's a way of doing that here, I'm not seeing it. So I think to edit this, we have to select the text area, hit enter, and that reopens this. And so we can do our editing here. So let's say we want to size this a little better. You can get the job done, like it works. It's just not quite as nice. We have to select this so it's red and then hit enter. And the other thing to do would be kerning. In Photoshop, you hit Alt and you move the arrow keys and that'll kern letters. We can't do that like that in this program. Again, if there's a way, I'm not seeing it. So you can do it in here. And I think you can do automatic kerning, but I think probably manual is the way to do it. And we can make the font size bigger in here. And now we can see the spacing a lot better. Now if I save this, close, I have to resize outside. So when I say it's not as intuitive as in Photoshop, I mean it. Again, this is something that they're actively working on from what I understand. So in version 5.3, the next one, this should be fixed. Anyway, I hope. So let's go back in here and see how we can do a little kerning and see that the gap between the O and the S is too tight. Here we can space it out. So we can kern and we can do it at the level of individual letters, and that's the main thing. So, if something really jumps out as blocky or blobby, like here, again, the gap between the H and the A is too tight. So we want to move that out a bit. That's basically that. So let's zoom out and hopefully we see it, there. Oh, I'm not going to say that was fun, but it's certainly better than doing it by hand with Letraset in 1989. Anyway, effectively that's it. Takeaway from this, please don't use bog standard ellipses. If you want to see how I did, let's see my structure for the ellipse here. Let me switch some of these off. There we go. So that was the structure that I used for this. So each one of these is set to fairly standard size and shapes. So if you want to try to reconstruct that yourself, I'm not a wizard when it comes to Beziers, but I certainly like being able to do the speech bubbles here. And again, just remember to switch off the blend mode if you're going to be doing like a lot of it, because it does slow it down. So, and again, all these files will be on the Patreon if you want to join up and access them there. So, speech bubbles, that was fun. So let me know if you want me to show, like I've been toying with the idea of doing my workflow when it comes to doing comic pages in Krita and Photoshop. Because I could do like a side by side. I think they're fairly similar, but in this case, there's certainly differences. So. Personal preference, I would still prefer Photoshop. I think Krita flickers a lot when you start doing stuff with it, but I wouldn't try not doing it in Krita. People do great stuff with comics in Krita too. It's just for me, some handling on multiple panels, I think, is a bit more responsive in Photoshop. But then again, I'm using CS6, which is an old version, and I think if I was using the latest Photoshop, I might hate it. So anyway, that's my current situation. Like and comment below. Remember, the Patreon exists. And I think I'm fairly flippin' wiped now after all that. So, yeah. Don't use ellipses. Just don't use ellipses, please, because you'll make Danny from The Shining very sad.